Thank you again for joining us for another one of our webinars. These are always free and these last about 45 minutes or an hour or so. I'm going to go through the slides here and give you a little bit more insight, and I'll of course introduce myself as well. So this month's topic, because May is a bunch of things. May is mental health awareness. May is, I think there's a physical activity awareness thing plugged into May as well. There's also Women's Health Month. So I thought, you know what, let's talk about something a little bit broader, and I chose hormones. And also, hormones is a topic and a term that seems to come up a lot. And I'm not entirely sure if everybody understands exactly what that is. I feel like it's a word that gets thrown a lot, especially on social media, of balancing your hormones. And so by the end of our webinar today, I'm hoping you'll have some of these takeaways with understanding what that even means. What is the role of hormones in our body? What that language around imbalances mean? And also understanding some of the lifestyle habits that can support your hormone health, the connection between those other, what I call the pillars of health, with sleep and stress and movement and food and nutrition. And then what I've been doing lately since the beginning of this year is I've also been including a free handout, a downloadable handout. So if you did not receive one already with the registration, then when I send out the email and the link and the survey at the end of this, I'll also make sure you get a link to the free handout as well, so you can use that and set up your own plan. So just some housekeeping information here. The session is recorded, as you probably heard as you were coming into the session. There is a chat box available. I do try to stay on task here with going through all the slides, but I'll pop into the chat every so often. And if you ever have any questions, comments, or feedback, you can go ahead and put those in the chat as well. But there's also time usually for Q&A at the end of every webinar anyway, and you can go ahead and dump that in there too, and we'll address that. Doesn't have to be about hormones, it could be about anything, food, nutrition. Happy to answer as whatever I can. As I always say, this is not medical advice. This is just informational, educational for you. I am a dietitian, not you're a dietitian. So just want to make sure we're providing some guidance, but anything that you may take in and include in your own daily habits, I want to make sure that you check first with your own independent providers to get a clearance, especially if there's anything as far as medicine regimens and physical activity. As I mentioned before, I always do a follow-up survey and a follow-up email. So in the email, you're going to get links to the recording, link to the handout, and there'll also be like a 5-minute 10 question-ish or so survey on there just to get some feedback as to how we did. And if there are any topics that you're interested in, then we keep that in mind for future webinars that we're doing. And I keep saying we because yeah, it's, technically it's me almost always, but there have been so many times in the past, and also there will be currently now and in a few months from now too, I'm going to be working with more dietetic interns and nutrition students. So sometimes they play a big role in helping me put these things together. So if we've never met before, hello, my name is Dina D'Alessandro. I am a registered dietitian nutritionist. I am based out of New York City, although currently the past few months I've been hanging out with my mom in Ocean County, New Jersey, helping her while she is dealing with some medical issues. I am also an adjunct lecturer and the campus dietitian up at Lehman College in the Bronx. So I know some of my students will be joining me or have registered for this as well. So welcome if you are one of my students. I also own and operate a virtual space and a private practice under my name and under my brand name of quote unquote DishWithDina. So you might see that logo and that name come up. I have a lot of training in a lot of things. I've been doing this for about 10 years. I calculated not too long ago about how many patients I've probably seen at this point, and it's got to be in the thousands. So that's pretty cool because this is a second career for me. So I'm so glad that it's been lucrative and I've really been benefiting from this new venture. As I said, I also work with interns and students, so I like helping mentor my future colleagues and whatever that they're going to be pursuing. Now, next here to dive into this whole conversation, again, you can feel free to use the chat if you want to. I like when there is some sort of interaction, but you don't have to if you don't need to. Give me a little thumbs up if any of this sounds familiar to you. This could be related to hormones or hormone imbalances or hormone health. If you're dealing with low or inconsistent energy, if you're having trouble with sleeping, if you're noticing, last month we had a whole conversation about cravings. Cravings are tied into dopamine, which we'll learn a little bit more about later on. So if you're dealing with cravings, mood swings, irritability, okay, yeah, there's a lot going on. So, it might be hard to manage stuff, but if things are being triggered, you're not really sure what the problem is, or you're just generally feeling like your body is off, that can be hormones at play, my friends. They are there to give you messages and provide some feedback to you. And they're not the enemy. They're not the enemy. We're going to learn a little bit more about how to help handle or balance your hormones as the slides progress. When I talk about pathophysiological things like in the body. I always like to give a little bit of an anatomy lesson here. So what we're talking about with hormones specifically, primarily, we're talking about the endocrine system. So you can see on the left-hand side the variety of the glands and different kinds of organs that are involved in helping us develop and maintain these hormones and produce these hormones. So it makes also the substances that help with the hormone production as well. So those endocrine glands are going to be releasing hormones directly into your blood system. And maybe you recognize some of these things like the pituitary gland, the thyroid, etc. Adrenal glands are the little things on top of our kidneys. And if you remember from our kidney webinar a year and a half ago or so, the kidneys are part of the urinary system, but part of what the kidneys do are those adrenal glands, and that helps with the endocrine system doing its job. So just like you're seeing here too, not all organs and tissues that release hormones or hormone-like substances are considered part of the endocrine system. There might be some overlap. There also might be some substances that act as what are known as neurotransmitters in addition to hormones. So I say this because you're going to start seeing some things like kind of repeat or overlap, and I don't want you to get confused. Our body is all running together. I joke the knee bone is connected to the neck bone and all of that. So they do work in conjunction with each other, and sometimes they work in opposition of each other as well. So we'll learn a little bit more about that too as the slides progress. So let's do a little hormone one-on-one discussion. So these hormones that we talk about, these are your chemical messengers that send signals in the body up to different various organs, tissues, etc. And they can fluctuate at a lot of different times in our lives, which I'll share shortly. One of the things I wanted to point out on this slide in particular, on the bottom, I have those three words: peptide, steroid, and amine. So I like just giving, actual chemical and scientific information to you as well. So you might have heard something like the GLP-1s, right? That's a big hot topic right now with people who are on weight loss management, and they're taking these chemical substances to help them with regulating their appetite and their weight management. That is known as a GLP-1 is a glucagon-like peptide. It actually occurs in our body, but what they're getting as far as medicine is concerned is to help them with regulating their appetite and plays a key role in blood sugar as well. So these are classifications or categories of where we see hormones land. So again, just the language trying to share with you. And as you can see on screen here, all of the different functions that they help us with. Metabolism. You've heard me use this time and time again. This is just how our body processes the food that we're using or eating, and how it utilizes it, and how it helps us with creating energy that our body needs to breathe, to eat, to sleep, to lift, do this over our heads, all those things. We're going to talk a little bit too in more detail in a sec about homeostasis. So keep that in the back pocket. Growth and development. Again, all these functions that are going on in our body rely on your hormones. So when I was doing this, like I have a Master of Science in nutrition, but that was like 1,000 years ago at this point. And I was like, what were they? Like 1 million hormones? I can't remember how many there are. There's only like 50. There are only 50. So you know what? We're going to take a little tour of them and meet these guys. Now, I'm not going to go slide by slide, one by one, but if you are noticing anything that you see sound familiar, whether it's your own personal journey, blood tests, social media, internet, etc., feel free to put something in the chat that you're like, oh yeah, I recognize those. So again, I'm categorizing these, but keeping in mind that some of them do multiple things. So they might also be in other categories as well. So you have your reproductive and sex hormones. Estrogen, testosterone, those are pretty common. Prolactin, if you've ever breastfed or you learned about lactation, prolactin is one of the hormones that are important for that particular function. Then we go on to metabolic and energy balance. So this is things like your blood sugar regulation and that stabilization that we always talk about when it comes to eating, appetite, fullness, etc. So you might see insulin, glucagon, if you're familiar with those two, leptin and ghrelin. That comes up a lot when we talk about food cravings, hunger cues. Cortisol, that comes up a lot, especially in menopause. My gosh, everybody's talking about cortisol and the stress responses. Then again, another subcategory with stress, metabolism, blood pressure, adrenaline, right? We've seen that come up with a fight or flight response. That number 23, angiotensin, if you were in the kidney webinar a while back, we talked about the RAA, the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone process that helps with regulating and managing our blood pressure. So that might be, again, another word that you've seen or are familiar with. Calcium, growth regulation, thyroid related things. Parathyroid hormone is the thing that helps with blood calcium and introducing that into the system. And then calcitonin, the way that I was taught in this in school was how it tones the calcium, it lowers the calcium in the blood. Digestive and appetite things. So I mentioned leptin and ghrelin before, but also gastrin and cholecystokinin. So if you had a gallbladder surgery, gallbladder removal surgery, that is technically known as a cholecystectomy. Cola is part of your gallbladder, and that also aids, in this case with the hormone, in fat digestion. So it's related to that part of that cycle. Mood, sleep, brain function, these things here, I'm going to go a little bit more into detail in some of them shortly, but melatonin, a lot of people take melatonin supplements to help them with sleeping. So maybe some of these like dopamine, endorphins might sound familiar to you. EPO, that's the red blood cell. So, anemia, blood related conditions, all of these things here that you see in front of you are related to blood and or immune regulation. Hormone related things. There's renin, number 46. That's part of the aldosterone thing that I mentioned before, angiotensin. And then other regulatory items here, like sex hormones that are, or a precursor, I should say. So the thing that kind of instigates the hormone production, skin pigmentation. Oxytocin, we'll talk about that in a little bit too. When you have breastfeeding, so that's the hormone that kind of helps with releasing the milk, and it helps with connecting the baby in that breastfeeding cycle with bonding, and also is involved in the labor of childbirth as well. So again, welcome to your 50 hormones. We're going to do not a super deep dive because this would have been 1,000 hours long if I really went into detail with all of those. So next up here, I want to talk about this thing called homeostasis. Homeostasis is basically just a fancy word of saying our body likes to chill. Our body likes to be in balance. It's a constant internal balance. It is a response and stimulus and receptor function that happens. It is based in what we call these feedback loops. So it's an automatic process that happens with keeping all of our body regulated to a normal level of what it needs to do. The way that this shows up in the other systems, you can see I put on the top there. So not just the endocrine system, but something like the nervous system is in charge of the parasympathetic and sympathetic responses, right? Again, that fight and flight, or it tenses and relaxes your body. The skeletal system is in charge of breaking down and repairing and replacing old bone tissue. The respiratory system comes into place. Again, the physical activity, the oxygen response, the huffing and puffing of whenever you're moving around. And it also helps with managing what is known as your blood pH. So the pH levels of your blood, alkaline and acid. Our body by nature is slightly alkaline. And I'm going to jump in here just a quick side note, so because we're going to talk about food in a bit. But when we talk about acid or acidic foods, sometimes people think of things like lemons or citrus foods. And yes, technically that is an acidic food if you're dealing with upper GI issues like GERD, reflux disease, that if you have something that's acidic, it can kind of like exacerbate that, like peppers or things along those lines. But because they are a plant-based food, they actually help with balancing out to the more alkaline world in your body. What we're really talking here about alkaline, or I should say acidic foods, is more of the highly processed things. Things are very high in sodium, high saturated fat, especially if we are chronically consuming them in excess amounts, which is you'll see in a bit when we get to the discussion around food and nutrition, which is why we always talk about diversifying your diet, get a little bit of everything, not focusing too much on any one thing because we don't want to overtax the system. Homeostasis is the name of the game. And then the last one up there too with the muscular system, how that helps with homeostasis is breaking down and rebuilding the muscles and also helping us with temperature control. So, generating heat to keep us warm. Okay, the next couple of slides, again, I'm not going through a ton of examples with this, but I'll give a few just verbally to you. So we have what are known as the antagonistic hormones, the things that act against each other. So when I share information like insulin and glucagon, that's a perfect example where insulin is helping to lower the blood sugar and glucagon raises the blood sugar. So when you eat, right, glucagon is the thing that's coming in and popping up and kind of spiking your blood glucose. And then insulin, assuming that you have a working insulin pancreas, etc., all the things that are needed for insulin, that it helps sending that blood sugar out into the cells and not keeping it in your blood system. Another antagonistic hormone pair is something like parathyroid hormone, which I mentioned before, increases the calcium levels, and calcitonin tones it down or brings it down. And that third one that I mentioned before, this is a good example too. Leptin is the fullness factor or the fullness hormone, and ghrelin, and again, in school, we used to call it the gremlin, right? Gremlin or ghrelin is the appetite. I'm hungry, I get hangry. That's the gremlin talking, the ghrelin hormone. And the leptin comes in. It's like, thank you so much for feeding me. And I am full now. My appetite has been satiated. Now, you would think if it's an antagonistic hormone that the other ones would be protagonistic hormones. No, they're not. They're called synergistic and permissive. And the way that these work is they work in tandem with each other. They either rely on each other with a combined effect, so that kind of like the parts are greater than the sum in a sense. So I mentioned earlier with breastfeeding, so something like prolactin of the milk production in breastfeeding, and oxytocin, which helps with letting down or releasing or ejecting that milk into the mammary glands. Those are an example of synergistic hormones. The other one, like permissive hormones, one hormone allows the other hormone to do something else. So a good example of this, again, are going back to those thyroid hormones, which stimulate the production of something called growth factors, and then that helps with the effects of the growth hormones as well. So it's growth and development. As an example, yeah, when I was doing this, by the way, listen, I always say I go down these deep dives. People may or may not realize that 1 hour of webinar, it takes me about 6 to 10 hours if I'm lucky, because I have a brain dump. And when I was doing these, I was thinking, I'm just going to put them all on the slides, like all of the antagonistic ones and permissive ones. And then I thought that's far too much information for people. We're trying to keep it high level learning here, just giving you a little bit of an overview. But I did want to talk about this hormonal imbalance thing because, sometimes in our world with dietetics, there are a lot of trends and hot topics and things come up that aren't necessarily recognized in the true evidence-based world. So sometimes language around things are not actual diagnoses, but this actually is. A hormone imbalance is quite serious because certain times and events in our lives can end up affecting how our hormones are either being produced or how they are working in our bodies. Things like age, right? As we age, a lot of things happen when we age. As we age, things are happening all the time. I didn't mention before, but the gut plays a role in immunity and also with some hormone like serotonin. There's some hormone things there too. So as we age, sometimes our gut is breaking down a bit, or if you have digestive system, gut issue might interact and cause an imbalance there too. But puberty, those spikes, those growth spurts that are happening, that's part of a natural process of life too, but that can cause hormone imbalances too. And then of course, life cycle stages like pregnancy, menopause. Stress, huge one. Learn a little bit more about that in a bit. Autoimmune diseases as well. Like I wanted to share some ones that, or I should say autoimmune and other conditions that can occur. So I want to share some examples if you've never heard of these, or maybe you know people who've had these particular conditions. Addison's disease. This is a rare disease that does affect those adrenal glands, those little kidney glands that I was mentioning earlier, and its ability to make hormones. So what ends up happening when there's a sluggish or an issue with the hormone there for people with Addison's disease is they end up with severe fatigue, unintended weight loss, and also because of the sluggishness, it's a low blood pressure issue too. So they might be apt to fainting or again, not being able to be steady on their feet or focusing on things. Certain eating disorders too, like anorexia nervosa, can cause hormonal changes as well. Cushing's syndrome, not sure if anybody is familiar with Cushing's syndrome. That is an excess or high cortisol level. So cortisol is the stress hormone there too. So in that case, there could be unintended weight gain, specifically in certain areas of the body where it kind of lands there. And also a thinning of the skin. So like a paperiness of the skin, and muscle weakness as well. Diabetes, hello, autoimmune disease type 1. Type 2 is the life cycle or lifestyle, I should say, related one. But that is a hormonal imbalance because insulin is not doing its job or it's completely malfunctioning. So in that case, that's regulating or not regulating the blood sugar issue there. Hot off the press as of 2 days ago, polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome. I had to write that down. PMOS, formerly known as PCOS, which was polycystic ovary syndrome. So that just got a rebrand a couple of days ago. But if you are dealing with formerly PCOS, now PMOS, that produces an unusually high level of male hormones in females. So we'll see things like unintended weight loss, hair growing on faces, and erratic periods as well. And then last, the thyroid. Thyroid is in charge of so many different things, but if you have thyroid disorders, then that can affect your the thyroid's ability to make hormones, and that can affect, in essence, everything else that's going on in your body. So, this can be quite challenging for people who either have rare diseases or are on the borderline of something, or even just with, medications, stress, things that you may not or may be in control of, but might be temporary, might be long term, where you start noticing a lot of changes in things like your menstrual cycles, hair and skin, libido, digestion, mood, etc. Sleep, especially. Who, very challenging to have to deal with this stuff if you are dealing with not just one hormonal imbalance, but quite a lot. I thought this would be good too to include information here about what are known as endocrine disruptors. So we are talking about natural or man-made chemicals. And when I use the term chemical, I'm not always talking about something toxic, because a natural chemical can be things that are existing in plants or the environment around us that helps protect that particular thing, but doesn't really, it's not really meant for us to be exposed to, especially in large quantities or large amounts. So there's always like an upper level issue there when we talk about things like disruptors. So as you can see on screen here in this little image, these are some examples, like the inner linings of cans, metal cans, again, to keep things fresh, but also that is sitting there. And when we open it, and if we have a lot of things that we're using that are either canned or products like plastic items, especially if you're microwaving them and those are releasing those chemicals into our environment. If you live, can't help it, if you live near, an industrial area, lots of pollution going on there, things that are being put out into the environment, into the air, Phthalines, things in spray bottles, cosmetics, things too, like anything that happens to be in your household. I don't mean to scare anybody on here, but it's helpful to understand that how much of too much is anything that could end up mimicking or interfering with our hormones and causing that disruption. So we just talked the slide before, internally there could be disease states going on, but there could also be other stressors as well. And things like this could be included in that too. So I very much encourage people when it comes to things like this, just, educate yourself on this. I think I might even have, or maybe I will do something on endocrine disruptors at some time in the future if it's not already existing in my library. But, read labels for things like plastic, not necessarily metal, but things like plastic, be careful. A lot of stuff is technically banned in the United States, but whenever they substitute a banned item down the line, there's probably something wrong with that chemical too. So, be careful with microwaving things, especially if it's plastic containers, like throw them out or recycle them every so often. Maybe switch to glass. That's what I did not too long ago. It's heavy. I'll admit it's heavy to carry around a glass container to and from places. But again, just, what's the exposure? How much is too much of anything? If you're driving, reduce the time that you're sitting in traffic or idling in traffic as well. Maybe have an air filter at home if that's possible, especially if you're not entirely sure of what your house paint is. If you live in an old building or an old apartment, there might be lead paint or other things that could be, kind of toxic to you in there. You can get that tested, by the way, from your health department if you need to. So I always like to talk to you about how do you get diagnosed with these things? Is a hormone imbalance something that you just have to know? I mean, if you're feeling a little bit off, you have those little things that we talked about before with changes in your body or mood or sleep disorders, go talk to your healthcare providers. Most of the time, a PCP, a primary care physician, is probably not going to put a lot of these things on the comprehensive metabolic panel. Some of them will show up, like your T3, T4, a lot of those thyroid ones, the PTH, those will show up in your blood test usually. But all the extra stuff, it's either going to be an out-of-pocket cost or your specialist will be ordering those labs for you. So it's important for you to advocate for yourself, which is why I also like doing these webinars. It helps you understand your body a little bit better and an arsenal of information, tools, and strategies that you can take with you to your doctor's offices so that you can inquire and be curious about what really is going on. Some of these things are very much overlooked or dismissed, unfortunately. The way that we test for these, you could do a blood test, a urine test, a saliva test. Now, I put information on screen here that I just want to clarify. Some of these things are ordered and you have to go to a lab. Some of these are ordered and you can take them home with you to do. But that is different than some of these at-home testing kits that you order off of the internet or late night on television when you're watching infomercials or social media where they talk about hormone imbalances and buy our kit. Those things are not very well regulated. And if you remember, I think it was December when we talked about complementary and alternative medicines, be careful with the quality of those things, how accurate or unreliable they might be. You don't want to end up spending money and not really and getting incorrect test results. So I thought that would be helpful too. As you can see on the bottom, I just gave some examples of specialists that might do some endocrine or hormone related lab orders for you if you have those specialists already. How we get treated? Well, if you're missing a hormone, like in insulin's case, if my body's not making one and I'm dealing with type 1 diabetes, I'm going to need to inject insulin into my body because otherwise I will die. So some of them are going to be a little bit less severe as we go through menopause. That's where you start talking or hearing things like hormone replacement therapy in the estrogen language. But if you're dealing with an issue with thyroid issues, you might be given something known as synthroid. So treatments can be synthetic or made in some way, shape, or form to mimic the naturally occurring hormone that's in your body that's no longer functioning properly or being in state of imbalance. In more extreme cases, there could be some surgery, removal of things, or radiation therapy to help regulate stuff. But as always, right, about 50 to 51% of your outcomes, your health outcomes, is based in lifestyle changes or lifestyle modifications. Obviously, always easier said than done, which is why I'm going to walk you through some helpful guidance, I hope. So first up, hello, as a dietitian, yes, my most important conversation is always revolving around food and nutrition. I do believe it's the foundation, but I like talking about these things as pillars, health pillars. When one falls down, they tend to all fall down, or at least it's quite unstable or unsteady. When you start paying attention to the one thing, then hopefully the rest of the things are kind of following suit. So I'll go through some of the guidance here. Again, this is going to be a bit of a quick and dirty overview because we definitely do a lot of deep diving in some of the more specific webinars that we've done in the past, which I'll share with you how you can see those if you don't know where they live in a bit. But here we're just talking again, understanding the balance of blood sugar, where really that sets the tone. Doesn't mean you have to be diagnosed with prediabetes or diabetes. Everybody can benefit from having balanced blood sugar. And the timing of that too. So we're talking about the balanced meals of whole grains, fiber-rich foods like beans and legumes and your leafy products. Protein sources, both animal and plant, play a role in helping us with protein to help keep us fuller longer and help stabilize that blood sugar. Healthy fats, big thing too. And also what I just mentioned too, the meal timing of stuff. I work, like I said, with a lot of students, but I also work with humans who have busy lives. And a lot of times they'll just skip meals or say, I'm not really a breakfast person, so I'll just go off and not really have anything until later in the day. But our body does require, my analogy is always gas in the car. The body requires, if I'm being active, that I should be fueling my body. So the timing of that is important too. Some of the guidance I've given in the past, whether you know calories or not really significant, except to understand that about 100 calories worth of food can give you about an hour's worth of energy, but it should be well balanced. So a little bit of everything, right? Some of my examples in the past have been an apple and a piece of cheese, or a banana and some nuts if you want to have a snack, or the way that you put your food together in a smoothie or a soup or a stew, or you have ingredients on a plate where there's a piece of chicken, animal protein. There's a salad that's dressed with olive oil. So you have some carbs and some fiber and some healthy fats there. And maybe you have some carbs on the side. Again, that could be whole grains or other types of starch or grain-based foods to, again, provide that balance. And so when you're eating, just, kind of consider when's the next time I'm going to eat, or what's going on in my schedule right now that I should maybe bring something with me. And maybe every 3.5 to 4 hours, just check in with yourself and make sure that you're fueling the car that is your body. Other things too, we talked a little bit before about like acidic levels and pH balance and some of those highly, what we call those ultra processed foods or things that are very, very high in sodium or saturated fats or refined sugars. So in opposition of that, including some anti-inflammatory foods like you see on here. I mean, listen, you know what you're supposed to do, right? I do this I've done what my webinars are going on for 3.5 years now. I'm constantly saying the same things over and over again. So these really richly, vibrantly colored fruits and vegetables, these produce items, they all bring something literally and figuratively to the table. So they help with reducing inflammation and supporting your overall health. Omega-3 fats play a role as well with easing that too, with helping in so many different things like brain health and function, and again, with decreasing that blood sugar spike. Next up, the micronutrients. So macros are your carbs, fats, and proteins. Micros are your vitamins and minerals. Tons and tons of things. Like you just saw 50 hormones, right? So there's just as many vitamins and mineral combinations. But I figured I'd focus on a few that might come up quite often, especially when people are deficient in things or they're dealing with certain conditions. So something like magnesium, which helps with reducing stress or managing stress. Magnesium-rich foods can be found in things like seeds, nuts, leafy greens, and legumes. Legumes are things like lentils and beans. Vitamin D, so hello, sun. By the way, if everybody's seen that, right? That's a vitamin D. That's a vitamin D tattoo. I like to show that off every now and then. That's how much I care about your vitamin D levels that I went and got myself imprinted with one. The sun is a perfect 10 minutes out there, just quick. Get some daylight, move around outside. Obviously, a lot of us end up putting sunscreen on, and I realize there's the cancer-causing effects of a lot of stuff, but just 10 minutes outdoors, boop, 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 and you get what you need from your body for vitamin D. In vitamin D rich foods, though, that can be found in things like what we call fatty fish. So that's things like salmon and tuna and sardines. Egg yolks, good option there too if you like eating eggs. I will say a quick side note about that. So yes, technically there's a lot of cholesterol in an egg, but you can add egg whites to your egg dish like I do. So I use, maybe one whole egg and then I'll put 2 to 3 servings of egg whites. So an egg yolk is good in its own sense. There's also choline in there too, which helps with brain health too. Or you can opt for fortified foods. So if you don't necessarily like animal products, which vitamin D is usually found in a lot of animal products, but if you're not an animal lover, you can purchase fortified milks, fortified juices, fortified cereals that have vitamin D added to that. Iodine rich foods are things like your sea vegetables, seaweed, kelp, iodized salt. So in America, it is mandatory that we add iodine into our table salt because we don't want complications with the thyroid. So that's already in there. So a little sprinkle of table salt will be a serving for you. There's also iodine found in things like dairy and eggs as well. And then selenium rich foods, again, to help support your thyroid health, thyroid related to hormones. A Brazil nut, who knew? Take a Brazil nut instead of a supplement. Boop, one a day. You did your selenium, you got your selenium recommendations in. You can also find selenium in things like seafood, organ meats, if you like liver and that sort of thing, and also poultry items. Dark chocolate too, but just a quick note about that. We've been seeing a lot of weird, like heavy metal issues come up in dark chocolate. So there is an anti-inflammatory properties to dark chocolate. A lot of people love eating that if they have a sweet tooth. Dark chocolate, a square of that will solve the problem. But I've noticed we've done a lot of testing recently. In the last couple of years, we're starting to see like heavy metals come up in that, either because the cocoa bean or the cocoa plant is somewhere where there is pollution and that's integrating into the soil. I'm not really sure what the mechanism is there. And again, I don't want to scare you because how much of too much is anything is what puts you over the edge. But I've kind of eased up on like forcing people to eat dark chocolate until we know what's going on with cadmium and nickel and arsenic and things like that. So, use it as your own discretion, in your own discretion. Again, not to scare you, just to educate you. Stress and cortisol, stress management, huge, huge thing, right? Stress is such a big factor when it comes to things like high blood pressure and brain health, focusing, etc. And just putting your own body just in that constant state of chronic stress. And even like stress is good sometimes too, right? Being excited to go get a new job or getting married, that's exciting too. But we're talking about a chronic level where your body's constantly fighting, constantly in a state of inflammation, and cortisol plays a role in that also. Now, I just focused here on two things. Not hydrogen. Cut and let's start over. Hydration, water consumption, and caffeine. Now, when I say hydration, fluids count. About 25% of our fluid intake can come from foods like water dense things like cucumbers or leafy greens or tomatoes, etc., watermelon, etc. But I'm really talking specifically about good old fashioned bottle of water or good old fashioned water. And then the effects of caffeine. So even though caffeine is a liquid, or coffee is a liquid, I should say, there is caffeine in it, which might counteract some issues when it comes to that cortisol hormone. So some of my guidance here and information here that I thought I'd share is caffeine is going to be a natural stimulant, obviously, right? And it can increase the jitteriness of it. I know a lot of people who say things like, my energy's crashing. I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. And my first question is always, did you eat? Did you eat enough? Because maybe your body needs energy from food, not energy from a stimulant like caffeine. So hydration can aid in that metabolism. All of those chemical functions that are going on in our body really do require water. And so what I recommend is upon waking, or instead of grabbing a cup of coffee first, especially on an empty stomach, make sure you have water first or some sort of fluid just to help you rehydrate after, being going through the whole night of not drinking anything. If you're going to consume coffee, please make sure you wait until those natural cortisol levels subside. So about an hour and a half or so is when you can have something. And I always say a lot of things don't do on an empty stomach. So if you can, pair up your coffee consumption with a food. Now, just a quick note. Okay, I think protein is just doing a little too much these days. I walk past Starbucks and they have protein coffee, and I'm like, here's where I need to step in and say some things. This is a supplement, right? When they put protein in things like a protein powder, it's technically a supplement. So I'm really going to encourage you, instead of being like, well, I'll just get a coffee with protein in it, eat the protein from your whole food. That is how your body loves to have stuff. It loves to have bioavailable things that are available to it in the whole food form. Please try to do that. So yes, a hack or a workaround could be go get the protein coffee, but don't do that if you don't have to. Okay, like let the protein just do other things and let your coffee just be coffee. Sometimes the coffee wants to be alone. Okay, next up, sleep, super important. We've talked about this in our brain health webinar as well a while back. Neurodegenerative disorders like dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., can be a result of poor sleep habits, whether it is quality or quantity. So some of the suggestions I've said here. And, by the way, chime in the chat. Do you have a bedtime routine? Do you have a time where you're like, and we're done for the day, and I'm putting my jammies on, and I'm going to wash my face, brush my teeth, and no more looking at screens, or maybe, some reading of a book, or maybe some winding down in some other way, like light music. I lower the lights, I put some candles on. As I'm talking right now, I'm feeling very, very relaxed because that sounds delightful. I also set not a timer, an alarm, which I'm very big on alarms and timers and reminders because I can't stand looking at things and remembering stuff. So I do that to help me at a certain time of night to make sure that's it. We're done. Screens off, wind down, change into out of your clothes and into something that feels a little bit more comfortable. Grab just a nice soft place to land and just empty your brain of things. Dark environments too. So light emitting, while I didn't mention this before, but in the wake up sense, if you want to kind of like improve some of that mood in the morning time, especially when it gets darker and shorter days, that you can use sit by the window. You can use one of those full spectrum lights that you plug in, and it kind of helps in mimicking the sun. But same thing when you're going to bed is try to do the best you can with making it as dark as possible, whether you have blackout curtains. I got a whole sexy contraption going on. I got a head thing and eye mask and ear things, and I want to take my sleep very seriously. And screens. So, yes, there's a blue emitting light that comes up that can impair how your sleep function is happening. So some people have a way to warm that up, but really, ideally, it's about not being stimulated before you go to bed. So doom scrolling should end, at least an hour or so before you're about to head to bed. Next thing I wanted to share too, so we always talk about physical activity, but I want to spread it out a little bit more and talk about more of how we relax and stimulate our body when it comes to helping our hormone health. So physical activity, generally speaking, whether you're daily walks, whether you're going out and working at the gym, weight bearing exercises, whatever it is that you want to do, chair seated yoga, etc. Yes, but I want to also focus on this thing called somatic exercises. We did a little bit of this. We had the mindful webinar, I think about a year and a half ago, where we put some of these into practice. Like we actually did it as a workshop, and that was super fun. So the first thing on there, if anybody's ever seen or heard of this word called pandiculation. Pandiculation is just our body's natural involuntary way to help with kind of reviving us. So, when it's like, first thing in the morning, like I might not even know I want to yawn and stretch. My body is just telling me that. Think of a cat, if you've ever seen a cat stretch like that too, or a little baby doing like over their head. That is all involuntary. That's our body's way of kind of telling us to, start up and interact and get that sensor motor awareness happening there. So pandiculation is something we can do. notice where your body is. Notice if you're feeling any stress. Try to shrug your shoulders or move around, or do like a quick little stretch like this. It does get the body, the blood, the oxygen flowing, and it helps with reducing that stiffness and acts, kind of as a tension reliever. Slow ab curl, that's exactly what it sounds like. So you're lying on the ground and you're doing a basic crunch, but you're really kind of emphasizing with medical clearance, you're emphasizing kind of that arch in the back and then that forward in the front. So we didn't talk about this either, but in the gut health discussion, we talk about something known as the vagus nerve, which is the bidirectional communication between our brain and our gut. So again, we're stimulating. It reminds me a little bit if you do yoga of the cat cow, right? Except cat cow, you're on like all fours, but this is actual in prone position. So you're lying down and you're doing a very slow ab curl. We're kind of stimulating that whole, the skeletal area, that neuromuscular system is getting woken up. Shaking, literally just doing this, right? Getting the blood body going, like kind of waking up the whole body. Jumping around, dancing is a good example of that too. Something called grounding. Not so much as putting your feet in the ground, but grounding exercises where if you're feeling, I do this with my students sometimes during exam time, which is happening next week, where you look off in the distance or you try to just become very aware of your environment and you choose things to kind of focus on in the five senses. So you're focusing on something you can see, something you can hear, right? Like right now I can hear the fan over the head of on my in this room. Something you can smell or taste or touch, like I can feel my clothes, I can feel the little fringe here. So it draws your attention to different things and kind of gets you out of that stressful zone or anxiety zone. And the relaxation helps with lowering the blood pressure, helps with reducing that heart rate. Diaphragmatic breathing. So again, belly breathing. A lot of times if we're not paying attention to how we breathe, number one, sometimes I forget, like I catch myself going, I haven't taken a breath in like a minute and a half. So we sometimes breathe from up here in our chest, but instead it's a little bit lower. And again, that helps with anxiety, pain management, stress hormones, and even people who deal with chronic lung conditions. Kind of that deep belly breathing can help with managing that as well. Okay, if we've never heard of this before, welcome to your feel-good hormones, the D.O.S.E hormones, your dopamine, your oxytocin. Oxytocin you saw before. I mentioned in that breastfeeding discussion. Yeah, it does that too because of the bonding, the attachment, the socializing feeling of it. Serotonin with the mood, endorphins, which run up to and kind of take the pain away, How do you boost your feel-good hormones? You want to put that in the chat for me if you feel like engaging? Like, when's the last time you got up, you did something you enjoyed, dance, watch a funny movie? Like, laughter is the best medicine, quote unquote. Again, socializing, being around people that bring you, and not soul-sucking socializing where, people who are just toxic and drain your energy, but ones that are like, that was so fun. I can't wait to do that again. Have fun as best as you can. Every day should be revolving around that as a priority, I would say. And that's a healthcare provider order. Okay, next here, we're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes here with just bringing it all together, understanding again that your body is just a messenger. A lot of these things are just bringing awareness. So if you're not in tune with what's going on, you can miss a lot of things. Your body is giving you signals and cues. It is responding to things. Please don't ever feel like it's broken in some way. It's just there to tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, you should check this out. So just again, a little recap of some of the things that we talked about today. Balancing those meals, the timing of things, not skipping things, making sure you have a good rhythm, the stress management, focusing on your sleep routines, patterns, and consistency over perfection. There is no such thing as perfection. I mean, come on, right? I mean, life be life and sometimes, and you just can't keep up with all the stuff. So flexibility is playing a role here, but how you define consistency, maybe sometimes it's just once a week you can take some time for yourself, or once a week you can go shopping for food. Maybe other times it's 3 days a week that you're going to go out and engage in physical activity. So figure out how you want to define consistency and success and what that means as far as how you compare that up. And that is, again, depending on your life, that can ebb and flow. So you're allowed to change the definition of those things as the years, as your life, as events in your world progress. Multiple hormones work together. So just remember that. Like I said before, it's not just one thing. There's a lot of overlapping, both in the categories of hormones and in your body's creation of and management of those hormones. But the goal is that homeostasis, balance out. So think of all the things that we talked about today and see how you want to implement them. So this is just a little screenshot of the handout that I put together. It's very, very basic. It's not even two-sided. Usually I do kind of large ones. I just really want you to focus on some things that are places where you can kind of keep an eye out for and reminders. Maybe you print one of these out and you put a little photo of the day of a food that you had or a meal that you had, meal that you made, and some daily practices that you can take into consideration based on what we discussed today that you can include in your repertoire. So at the end of every webinar, I always ask people, think about your next steps. What do you want to start doing? What's something that you haven't started yet that you think, okay, it's time for me to get my act together and let me get cracking on that thing? What's something you want to keep doing? Maybe you're like, you know what, Dina? This wasn't news at all to me, and I've been doing all the things I need to do with the stress and the movement, etc. Well, that's great. So I just validated all the stuff that you've been doing. Keep up the good work, my friend, and make sure that you remain consistent at that to maintain balance, homeostasis, and help with your hormone health. Or what's something that you want to stop doing? Is there something in your life that you're like, you know what? I can't be at that job anymore. I can't be in this relationship anymore. I can't be in debt anymore. Maybe you can address that, and that can help lowering or improving whatever your situation is, and in turn can help improve your overall health. All right, my friends, I'm going to share on screen here what I was mentioning before. So the Dish with Dina playlist. I am really not on social media anymore. I spent 10 years, 13 years on Instagram, like since it came out, constantly doing so many things. In the past years, it has stressed me out. So that is one thing that I stopped doing. I took that off my list. But I'm really proud of all the content that we've created. So like I said, when I say we, I talk about my interns, my students, but also I've met complete random strangers on the internet because I'm chatty and I like to make friends. And I also ask my colleagues to help me with things. So not only do we have a ton of webinars on the DishWithDina TV YouTube channel, but we also have the podcast that I did for 5.5 years. And that was something I stopped as well because that was a little bit overwhelming. That's a handful of episodes, a couple of years worth of episodes are on there too. Every topic you can think of, we have tried to come up and cover, and then do iterations of that as well. Plus, I like promoting these too because, there's playlists on there. There's stuff that I feel is procured in a way or curated in a way that I feel is evidence-based and very educational and informative. But I would love to have you also subscribe or like or share it because you know how saturated the internet is. So if my little tiny channel can kind of get out there and make a difference to people who are struggling, I would be super happy. I also, as I said before, I'm a registered dietitian. So I have a very part-time private practice. I see maybe like 12 to 15 patients a week or so. I take a bunch of different insurances. I can work across state lines as well because I do telehealth in some of the states that's allowed for me to cross over. So if you're interested in working with me or just finding out what I do, you can go to dishwithdina.com, check out my website, click on all the things. I write weekly, well, sometimes it's not consistently weekly, but weekly blog posts as well. Again, variety of topics, information, etc. And if you don't have insurance, I do work on reduced rates and sliding scales. So I'm always like, what can you afford? And if you can't afford anything, let's see how we can make it work. I'd rather be of service to you than let you be abandoned and hand you off to people who maybe don't know as much as I do or other dietitians I can refer you out to. All right, so let's wrap up with a quick thank you to all of you who joined us or those of you who had registered and will be watching the recording of this next month. So I usually do this on the second Thursday of every month. So next month, we're going to do a mid-year reset. Perfect timing for hormone health and hormone balance. That's going to be on Thursday, June 11th and from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern time. So at this point, we have a few more minutes. If anybody wants to chime in the chat, ask questions, feedback, etc., while you're thinking and kind of like digesting all of the knowledge that I have handed over to you. I also want to give a quick shout out and thanks to the references, the resources, the researchers, all of the scientists that put together the journal articles, the books, etc. Because I really do mean business when I provide you with this information. I'm just not making this stuff up out of my head and stuff that I think I heard. Like I'm legit doing research and working through and looking through all of the things that exist out there. So thanks everybody for joining. Let's take a look in the chat if anybody's had anything that you're chiming in on. If not, thank you so much. Thanks for joining. I appreciate you so much. And if not, then hopefully I'll see you again at the next one. I hope you have some takeaways from this and keep an eye out for that email When you register, obviously I have your email address. So you're automatically in my newsletter, my monthly newsletter. You can always opt out, but at the very least, just wait to get the email after this so you can get the link to the recording, the handout, and you can fill out that survey for me. So thanks so much, everybody. It was a pleasure being here. Eat well, be well, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon.